Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Mr. MC. Let me first correct that I've never been on the board of WACSI, though it's a position that in the fullness of time might be a good idea, Nana. Also, because it's difficult. I'm now in the UN, and suddenly I'm here. And in civil society, we would have spent less time on protocols. But let me put my jacket on and do the protocols. So the executive director of WACSI and the board of WACSI who are here present, the ECOWAS Commissioner for Peace and Security, and other colleagues from ECOWAS here. My colleague, the UN Resident Coordinator for Nigeria, the raft of international development partners, OSIWA, OSF, Ford Foundation, Triple NGO, and mainly then to our civil society brothers and sisters who are in the room, and of course the media and all other protocols duly observed. It's a pleasure to be back here in this capacity, and it was interesting listening to Nana speak about her experiences here in Nigeria as a Ghanaian. And I now have the same shoes on at the other end, and I describe it as a sibling rivalry between us, whether it's when we are contesting whose jollof rice is best, and we all know the answer to that, or whether we're really talking about different levels of developments and quite seriously, the lessons that we can learn from each other as countries. And I also grew up in this space and actually spent quite a lot of time and have cherished contacts in Ghana who made my landing in Ghana quite easy from civil society. The truth is, we live in ECOWAS, but these two countries play a significant role, and the resource that sits, the human capacity that sits across these two countries is significant and valuable, and something that we must learn to share much better. And so the introduction of the node here is a welcome thing. In fact, originally when I went there, I said, these people have come, they've taken even WACSI, they've taken Twitter, they've taken everything to Accra. So it's great to see that we have something like this coming up here. And so I'm here as the chair. It's a privilege and an honor to do so. And so very few words from me, but some thoughts. Civil societies. Really. We live in a very, very complex world now. It was complex enough in 2019. And now, of course, I work with the UN, and we're really concerned to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. But just since 2020, so much has also changed. We've had a COVID-19 pandemic, which had some health impacts, but mainly significant socioeconomic impacts for developing countries. We've seen countries also now reeling from the impacts of the Russia-Ukraine war that again exposes the underbelly of our vulnerability as nations. I often joke about it. I say, how can it be that two countries so far away are at war and then we become sick on this continent? And so there are many lessons for us to learn. This week, we have colleagues from Nigeria, from all over the world.
What?
Also,
I was trying to do it on my phone.
Of climate and the impacts of the environmental degradation that is globally affecting everybody. In this economic crisis, for us in the UN, the biggest challenge is where the finance is going to come to deliver the Sustainable Development Goals for the whole of the world. There was already a gap before 2020. That gap is widening significantly, compounded by climate impacts, compounded particularly in this sub-region by conflict issues, growing violent extremism, and a sense in which we're not one. So that social cohesion that is really critical to achieving development, that foundation of peace, which I call the rocket fuel upon which development can happen, being eroded day by day. And important countries across the world and in this sub-region, crisis after crisis after crisis, after a significant trajectory of bouncing back from the COVID-19 pandemic, We see Ghana going to the IMF. We see all the countries still trapped in the spaces that they shouldn't be, and growing inequality. And so there is much work to be done if we are to succeed in really achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. My last piece of work here in Nigeria was heading up SACE, which really was trying to find ways to make civil society more impactful in the kinds of results that we're able to achieve. And so the work of WACSI is extremely important, because governance will work because there is an interaction between citizens and the state. And if that is not a strong relationship and interaction, not necessarily negative, constructive and strong, then we will not see the rise in accountability that we need to see in all of the countries in this sub-region that will enable the resources to be spent on the critical issues that will deliver the Sustainable Development Goals. And we in the UN are particularly keen that we increase the levels of partnership that we have with civil society, not instrumentally delivering projects as Nana was describing, but actually as strategic partners who are helping everybody think about what those priorities are and make the right investments that will make change happen. So overcoming some of the big issues. How do we overcome the founder syndrome? How do we think about sustainability of organizations? Increasingly, in a world in which we know that government and civil society alone will not deliver the change, how do we engage and involve the private sector? Not just as CSR contributors, but as active agents for achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. How do we move to have impactful advocacy? Not advocacy that just makes our organization shine out or our network shine out, but actually delivers solid policy change that is sustained and sustainable over time. And in a continent where we see dwindling resources coming particularly from donors and in international development partners, how are we measuring success and impact and showing that in a way that we deliver value? Collaborating, not competing. Overcoming the rent-a-crowd syndrome. And civil society really has to think about its own values and integrity and not follow the political sways of the moment and then find itself wound up in some of the problems that it sought to solve in the first place. And this is particularly pertinent here in Nigeria, where we are coming up to an important election for the leadership of this country in a time and a space where we know that unless we do something really drastic and dramatic, Nigeria is going to be locked down for yet another 8 years. And so how do we end the lockdown, to use the COVID parlance? And what role can WACSI play? And we think this is a really important actor in the ecosystem. I think the node here will make a big difference. And I think WACSI, you're right. There are big changes happening out there. The digital transformation is huge. And we often don't think about what it means in the space that we're in. And so investing in this, beginning to understand how nonprofits are able to use tech to reach the millions and millions of people who are in this country and across the sub-region, to forge social cohesion rather than promote hate speech and division, to really leverage on each other's skills and competencies rather than to compete with each other, and to find solutions that actually work, not just for citizens in the civil society space, but for all citizens. How do you bring in young entrepreneurs into the business of delivering the Sustainable Development Goals? How do we really bring the private sector into this game in a way that doesn't just mean they're ticking a box and giving a bit of cash here and there, but they're actually committed to achieving those goals and to operating in a way that respects human rights and advances the overall cause? So I think these are really, really important issues to be addressed. And I think our keynote speaker is probably one of the most competent people to do this, having established over the years his own credibility. And I just like to thank you all for inviting me here and to say this is a really important event. I would hope that my colleague, resident coordinator here, will connect with WACSI too and see this as an important player and actor in the sub-region. And I wish you all well for today. Thank you very much.